Good afternoon or evening, everybody, and welcome back to another weather forecast here by Agent Weather Forecast. And this is going to be another tropical update here on the North Atlantic. Still monitoring Tropical Storm Peter and Tropical Storm Rose as well. Really monitoring. And something that has caught my eye is Invest 90AL. And this could easily become Tropical Storm Sam very quickly and overall within the next few days. As well, even potential for this to possibly become Hurricane Sam. So keeping a very close eye on this, as well watching out for the remnant of Odette. That as well has potential to reform as well. So we may get Sam and Teresa before the end of September, which will definitely lead us into the possibility to get into the auxiliary list. Obviously, we don't have any Greeks anymore, so we're going to get into the auxiliary list. And obviously, that will lead us with Audria. So we were going to see how the season progresses, but right now it seems as if we are going to be coming on track to get into that auxiliary list if Teresa and Sam form before October. But without further ado, let's get into the video. As well, be sure to smash that subscribe button, as well as smash that like button so we can get the algorithm to recommend this video towards more people who are not already viewers. And as well as smash that bell icon so you guys can get notified as soon as I post a video. But without further ado, let's get into the forecast. So it's going to be a close call which one actually forms first, because here's the remnant of Odette, and here is obviously Invest 98L. So, I mean, obviously, as of now, 98L does have a higher chance for the next 48 hours, has a 60% with the next 48 hours, while the AOI here, the remnant of Odette, is a 20% for the next 48 hours. However, again, I wouldn't doubt this actually skyrockets because a lot more models are starting to jump on this. And I think there's a chance this could very well become Sam. I mean, either of these could very well become Sam rather soon. So it's going to be a very close call which one actually becomes Sam. But it's likely we get Sam and Teresa out of both of these because these both have rather good conditions. At least this one, obviously, 98L has really favorable and conducive long-term, obviously, conditions. While this one up here, the AOI of Remnants of Odette, is going to have really limited time before it gets ejected back into the jet stream and then going quickly into the really Arctic cold waters. But basically, it's likely we do get Sam within maybe 98L. However, the GFS and a few other models are hinting that the remnant of Odette actually forms before 98L. So it's going to be a very close call which one actually forms first. So we can't really say Hurricane Sam yet. It's kind of a there's definitely likelihood 98L becomes a hurricane, but it's either whether it's going to be Hurricane Sam or Hurricane Teresa. It's going to be just a matter of which one forms first. But there's Tropical Storm Peter at 40 miles an hour. Minimal center pressure has actually increased to 1,008 millibars, and it's moving west-northwest at 9 miles an hour. And then Rose is 40 miles an hour still, 1,008 millibars. So they both actually increase in pressure, so they're still very similar in pressure. But let's go into the overall again. So here's the overall 98L, 90% for the next 5 days. Again, really great conditions for the next few days. And then, of course, we have low pressure could acquire some subtropical characteristics marginally over the marginally warm waters in the next few days. So it's most likely going to become subtropical. But let's go to the overall look at the discussion for Tropical Storm Peter. So we still have this key message. Rainfall around the southern overall region of Tropical Storm Peter could lead to areas of urban and small stream flooding through today across northern Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, portions of the Virgin Islands, and the northern Leeward Islands. Again, this is the key message from this is a key message from earlier today at 11 a.m. And then here's the overall look at the forecast. So likely that at this point from now on, Peter is going to weaken to a tropical depression by most likely tomorrow morning, and it's just going to deteriorate from there as the upper low winds become less favorable. Let's now look at the overall discussion here for Tropical Storm Rose, and this as well is going to go through a very slow death as it weakens into a 35-mile tropical depression within the next 12 hours, and it stays at 35 miles an hour for a whole 3 days basically. So it's going to be basically a post-tropical depression for quite a long time. So here's the overall visible look on Tropical Storm Peter, and here's the overall low pressure. So obviously it was very open earlier, but now we are starting to get some convection around the system itself, but really good amount of convection developing lately within the past few hours across the eastern quadrant. This thing has really had limited convection developing as the conditions are deteriorating, but it did get a lot of just overall cloud cover and overall development of storms to the eastern quadrant. But the low pressure is right here, seeing as well some convection developing towards the west of this low pressure, but obviously conditions aren't going to be good much longer. And this does not look like a tropical storm, even if there is a big burst of convection. And there is some that cloud cover covering the low pressure now. It does not look like does not look like a tropical storm whatsoever, and I don't think it really ever has. It kind of looks more so tropical, if anything, extra tropical. But right now we have overall good. Overall, you can kind of see a small outflow boundary though of convection, basically stretching out from this big burst. So we have this little small, basically convection burst. Or not convection burst, but I guess a burst of overall energy around this overall line from basically Puerto Rico all the way to the actual main area of convection. So we are still seeing some spreading out of convection towards the overall eastern quadrant. But other than that, there's really no good signs of development, and it does not have really good structure. So here's a look now at the Tropical Storm Peter forecast on the National Hurricane Center as of the 11 a.m. AST update. This is advisory number 12, so the wind field has really not changed much. It's still very, very lopsided directly. It's just centered towards the northeast quadrant and northeast of the low pressure itself. So it's just generally not looking the best as you split it really in half. The overall where we have the most conducive environment is where we are seeing in the upper right-hand quadrant. That's where we are seeing the strongest winds and the actual only tropical storm wind sustained. While in the other parts, there is no tropical wind sustained, and that is probably due to the overall really unfavorable conditions with the upper level wind as well, even with a little bit drier. But other than that, it's really just an ugly shape. It's not really looking too good whatsoever. Gonna stay at the tropical depression until really tomorrow around the evening hours, and then it becomes post-tropical and likely not to pose a threat towards Bermuda. And let's just say Tropical Storm Rose is not looking much better. It has a more defined area of strong counterclockwise flow, actually. It's not looking too shabby. I mean, it has at least convection. It's kind of more I want to say semicircular, but it looks like more central circular, kind of like that within the overall, like, banding and overall waves of all, like, the cloud cover. Let me just explain what I mean. So you can kind of see that it's kind of like a little donut. You see like all the layers of this cloud cover. So this is kind of centralized circular, or kind of this centralized symmetrical. So you can kind of see like the layers, and then obviously it's kind of wrapping like that. So that's why it said it's not looking too shabby, although it looks nothing like a tropical storm. That's why I'm saying it looks a little bit better compared to earlier yesterday when it kind of just didn't have much going on. But now actually has a decent amount of convection kind of circling around on a really strong, actually, counterclockwise flow. This is actually not too shabby of counterclockwise flow. So obviously that's how we know it is fully tropical, because it does have counterclockwise flow and rotation all around at the low pressure, and obviously a closed low pressure. And somehow, weirdly, this is a cold core storm, not a warm core storm, and that's why it's also not subtropical, but really good convection burst. I don't know what is up with both Rose and Peter, but they both just have all the convection staying to the east here. I believe with this scenario, it's because of the overall dry air trying to sneak its way in. You kind of see some drier SAL, preventing any initiation anywhere in this side, while we're seeing really this part of the east of the actual portion of the low pressure, anywhere kind of this way. It has overall the best part of the overall tropical wave kind of left before it gets suffocated within the next few days by the SAL, because obviously we know 98L has the main part of the moisture bubble in AEW that Rose was initially a part of, but obviously as Rose quickly moved to directly northwest, where it kind of branched off from that tropical wave and tropical trough, so it does not have much moisture going on with it, and that's exactly why it's not going to thrive much longer. So here's a look at the Tropical Storm Rose National Hurricane Center forecast and advisory. It's probably going to be the last time we actually mention Tropical Storm Rose, because it's obviously going to weaken to a tropical depression rather soon. But there it is. It's going to say tropical until really on Thursday. It's a really slow mover, so we'll still be on our radar for a while, for the next maybe 3 days, due to it's moving so slowly. But once it actually starts going towards the northeast, it's going to get really into big trouble. It's going to become post-tropical very quickly after that turn. So here's a look now at Invest 98L. It's also not looking too shabby. Seeing actually, unlike Rose and Peter, the only tropical storms we have in the North Atlantic right now, this is actually convection is actually centered towards the northwest portion of the low pressure. Obviously, a little bit of convection kind of moving counterclockwise in a very weak counterclockwise flow. Uh, Pretty far east of the low pressure, so it's not looking too shabby. Kind of having a really elongated low with really just unorganized winning patterns, really. So it's really still at this point, it's still a tropical, it's still an invest, but likely to get upgraded to a tropical depression within the next most likely 24 to 36 hours if it continues to go on this trend. Because as well, we're seeing a good amount of kind of divergent flow. Cirrus clouds are right within this part of the system, as well as seeing some strong overall inflow coming with the system as well. So it's not looking too shabby. There's a low pressure right there, basically at the latest around 30 west and just around 10 degrees north. Actually, it's more like right here. There we go. Right there is where the actual low pressure itself. Basically, 29 west and around 10 degrees north is where this low pressure is currently located. And going to likely continue to go really around at that west-northwest pattern, but once it starts getting its act together, because obviously 98L, in my opinion, has a really good chance to become a hurricane, at least Category 1. At this point, it's going to start steering further from west-northwest to a little bit sharper toward a northwest turn. So right now, at least now, due to it being rather weak and then obviously still trying to organize, not really having much influence within any ridge or trough due to the really weak overall upper level wind, it's most likely to continue at a kind of a west track, and then likely that will allow for it to go over warm ocean heat content and continue to get structured better. But as of now, and continue to monitor the system. So here's the latest on 91-degree temperature forecast, or IR. You can see obviously a lot of the overall convection and overall storms and overall cold cloud tops is really remaining towards the northwest of the low pressure. So seeing actually a good amount of convection, but it's obviously not fully wrapped. We're seeing a little bit that kind of saw like I mentioned, just right now in satellite, we're seeing a little bit kind of banding starting to kind of wrap it around a little, get towards the west, or sorry, to the east, but very minimal convection within that. Here's the overall look at the winds. So this is what we have so far wind-wise, picking up, let's see here, around 30 knots here, I believe. So this is 30 knots. So we are still obviously experiencing decent winds as of now, but obviously this is really kind of not the best accurate. We kind of want to get ASCAT data to prove this, but we are getting some overall decent winds around this elongated low pressure. But since we don't really have a full pass on ASCAT, this is really not the most accurate thing to use. If we look at the overall rain, where the rain is, the heaviest rain is, like I did say, it's going to be remaining to the northwest of that low pressure, so seeing kind of that really strong convection initiation, specifically centered across one part of the low pressure. So definitely not towards the trough depression formation or structure just yet, but it's going to get there. And here's looking now at 37 temp. Well, it's not looking the best right now, but we will see how it progresses in the next few days. So here's an overall looking at the Invest 98L model intensity guidance, and they are still remaining quite intense considering the first few advisories. Not advisories from the actual National Hurricane Center, but from the actual tropical participants intensity guidance. Basically, the first really are usually intense, but as they kind of go on, after a few days, they kind of become less intense and more broad. But this one's continues to stay rather intense with still a lot of the majority gains to a Category 1 with a few. Let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4 getting to a Category 2. And then obviously there's the typical H-Wharf getting into a Category 4. But likely to become a tropical storm as early as 24 hours with the majority kind of a big blob right here within around 48 hours. So that's kind of if the 48 hours does actually become true, and that's when it actually forms into a tropical storm. Then we're going to really see whether maybe the AOI up there in the northern Atlantic actually does become SAM. But we shall see what actually happens, because it's going to be very close which one becomes SAM. I think overall 98 will most likely become SAM, or at least a tropical depression 18 first. But I most likely think that 98 will become SAM, and then right after the AOI up there in the North Atlantic does get into Teresa. However, again, there are so few models that have the AOI up there forming before 98L, which is why I'm still a little skeptical. Once it becomes a tropical storm, whenever that is, sometime this week, it's going to really strengthen quite quickly here. I mean, going to go, for example, this big blob from 48 hours from tropical storm to, let's follow these, basically within a hurricane maybe around 2 days after. So it's going to really get its act together. So I think this could honestly easily become a Category 1 we have a lot of action. The majority gains to a category once crosses in half. You can see we have a ton of these. I mean, we have at least maybe 10 gains to Category 1. So definitely keeping a very close eye on this consistency. As well within the GEFS tracks, minimal under pressure. These are as well going pretty intense already as far as we can go. 991 millibars with the mean. While a lot of those are getting stronger, are taking obviously further northwest, we're at a faster rate, are getting anywhere from sub 980 to sub 970. Like I did say, the further it strengthens, or the earlier it strengthens, and the more intense the strengthening is, the sooner it's going to do that northwest turn. So if it does strengthen like crazy, or at least to a hurricane, before anywhere close to the Leeward Islands, is most likely going to really go all the way up northwest. But if it's rather weak and very broad, there is going to be a chance that it does hit the Leeward Islands. But again, that chance is very, very, very low. But there are a few that are getting this making landfall within the sub 1,005 millibars. But obviously, this is by far going to be way stronger than 1,005 millibars by the time it actually gets that far eastward. So it shouldn't be a threat whatsoever for the Caribbean. And here's the overall 18Z model track guidance. Again, most likely going to go out to sea. And a lot of these models are agreeing. Of course, the overall waters are pretty favorable within this atmosphere as well. For those who are wondering how in the world is Odette, the remnant of Odette actually have a 60%. Actually, we're actually considering this actually becoming a storm. Well, obviously, this X right here, basically, where the actual storm itself is actually basically right here, I believe so. If I can maybe mark it right, I think it's around right here. So it's actually not in too shabby waters. It's actually 24 to anywhere from 25 degrees Celsius. And if it does go further southward, just a little bit further, then it gets to maybe 26.5 degrees Celsius before it goes back up. So it's actually not going to be in actually shabby waters. This is actually typical SSTs we actually get in the North Atlantic. So obviously that's the typical waters we typically get at this time of the year. And obviously, for comparison, this is typically waters we see in the MDR in July. So it's definitely not the warmest water, but look at that really, really massive blob of extremely warm water right there in the MDR. It's got to be some of the warmest waters I've ever seen in the MDR. That is 33.3 degrees Celsius. That's absolutely mental. That's probably the warmest water I've ever seen in the MDR, especially in the eastern MDR out of all the places. Typically in the MDR, you see the warmest waters in the eastern and the western MDR. But overall, very favorable conditions for Invest 98L. It's got really warm waters ahead of it, no matter where it goes. So again, that's going to be another big factor to its strengthening. And as we go through the video, the 5 o'clock advisory has come out for the National Hurricane Center, and we now have a tropical depression, Peter. So it actually has weakened to a tropical depression, so it rose, it's remaining, and there's not really been much to change here. It's still a 2040. For the AOI up there, and then a 6090 for 98L. So here's the overall look now at the 18, or this is actually 12Z GFS, and see what they have. So obviously, Peter kind of just falls apart now. It just gets really just ripped apart by the conditions. And there we have now the obviously AOI up there, the remnant of Odette, and there we have Tropical Storm Rose, and there is somewhere over there in the MDR, there we have that tropical trough, which will be associated with an Invest 98L. So we have that very, very strong high pressure right here, the Canadian Ridge, and that's going to eventually kind of steer this storm actually pretty far away from obviously the Newfoundland area. So it's going to kind of continue going south a little bit and then back up to the north as it gets steered basically by a trough down here. And it's going to help push it towards portions of the directly northward, as well. We have kind of two high pressures basically right here that are right between the systems. So this high pressure right here is going to kind of push it that way, or kind of push it more like this way actually. The high pressure is going to push it this way, and then obviously this one is going to kind of push it that way. But obviously as eventually this high pressure up here wins, it's going to steer it to the north, basically directly to the north, because that really strong steering, since this high pressure is rather strong and it is very close to the low pressure itself, it's going to directly steer it like that. So that's why it's not going to go anywhere. And even if it were really weak, it wouldn't go like that, because obviously there's a high pressure up here. So it's kind of keeping it away from the U.S. and Newfoundland, and this is just kind of keeping it scooping up like that. So look at this, 996 millibars right here. Within just 30 hours, like I did say, the GFS actually has it forming first before potential 98L becoming Sam. But obviously, if this happens, this would not be Sam, and 98L will most likely be Teresa. While this AOI up here, soon to be 99L, will most likely become subtropical storm Sam. I mean, 995 millibars. Again, we kind of just saw it. I mean, the waters aren't too shabby. And then obviously there we actually see the low pressure finally popping up within 66 hours. So I think the GFS is definitely underestimating the overall conditions for Invest 98L because they haven't really not popping up and forming for like another 3 days. And I think that's pretty late considering the overall already 60% chance for 48 hours. So I think it's obviously going to become a trough depression within the next 24 hours or so, or maybe slightly more than that. And then 1,001 millibars, 1,002 millibars, and then as it starts strengthening, it looks like a threat towards the Caribbean, but as it starts strengthening, and it's going to start going northwestward a little bit, and it's exactly what's going to happen. It starts really strengthening 977, 971. I mean, it's going to really go kaboom, 966, and then we see the overall strong steering there from a ridge, and that's going to kind of push it that way to the northwestward, and then going northward. And then we have a high pressure right here that's kind of blocking it from the United States. So this high pressure can kind of be a blockade system for the Northeast. So obviously, instead of seeing a Florence 2.0, we're going to be seeing, obviously now, kind of an after-sea storm just like that from that strong blockade. And obviously, it's going to be 965 millibars. That's really strong considering the GFS of what they're showing. I mean, as low as 963. And then 962, 957, 958. I mean, this thing's going absolutely crazy according to the overall GFS. So obviously, we typically know the 12Z GFS lows being quite intense. Let's see what the CMC has to say though. So we're gonna just kind of skip what they have for Rose and Peter, and see what they have for the AOI up there. So they also have it at 1,002 millibars. So that's within 30 hours. So this may actually become Sam, subtropical storm Sam. So it's going to be very interesting. And then the CMC kind of finally showing Invest 98L 992 millibars within basically within the next around 6 days or so by September 27th. And then just as they just get it strengthening just before heading for the Lesser Antilles, it just steers slightly northwest and just spares Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, because you can see overall the CMC is rather weak compared to the GFS. I mean, look at the positioning. Since it's so weak, it gets kind of steered by the trade winds. It has not really become a factor from the overall trough and ridge. So there's a location there of the CMC at 1,003 millibars, and the GFS at the same time. And oops, let's do that again. And there's what the GFS is showing, like right there. And as you not go further on, let's see what they have. So here's obviously the GFS by September 29th right here. And let's go back to the CMC, what they have. And they obviously have it basically, let's go back here, and they have it way down here. And that's obviously because it's a lot weaker, because at this point, GFS has it 979 way over here. So it's kind of taking a sharper turn to the northwest, while the CMC is just sparing Puerto Rico and the Lesser Antilles because it starts strengthening way last minute. But 979 millibars, and then really strengthening to 975. So this could very well be a very strong storm, whether it's Sam or Teresa, whatever name it is. Keeping a very close eye as well, even watching out for maybe another AEW soon. So continuing to watch the MDR as we continue throughout the peak season. And then of course, let's look at the overall trade winds. I actually want to get into the overall steering pattern for the AOI or the Remnants of Odette, basically. So here's the overall where we are seeing a trough like that, ejecting in the Gulf Stream, and it's going to kind of keep this storm basically kind of going like that a little bit, and not going due west and following the jet stream. So it's going to kind of go like that down south, and then we have a trough developing here, really prominent trough, and that's going to kind of just spike it up with southerlies or southwesterlies, just scoop it back northward. And it's going to just go like, kind of just rotating. Kind of just gets close by the overall trough. Very, very weird pattern there. But it just gets circled by the trough. It's just going in circles and circles and circles until it just dies out. But like I said, really weak trade winds and not much steering patterns whatsoever in the MDR for Invest 98L. So it's going to continue to go westward. But I mean, look at this upper level anticyclone for 98L. I mean, it looks absolutely beautiful, really clear, multiple outflow channels I mean, this is like a triathlete channel, so this is a very, very good and strong upper level anticyclone, which will be another big factor towards 98 most likely strengthening and getting quite strong within the overall MDR. And then obviously you see a really strong trough. I mean, it looks like an overall TTT and then very strong ridge, and that's going to kind of keep it from heading for the US again. So the strong trough right here, and a blockade system. And as this ridge gets pushed further northeastward, the low pressure is only going to be forced to go northeastward. Is exactly what's going to happen. You just follow my arrow, there you go, see exactly that happens. But I hope you guys enjoy the video, and I'll see you guys later.